I'm here with Stephanie Gefeller and Lacey Cornelison, and we're going to talk about the fourth and final domain of the PEAK criteria, meaningful life. Steph, could you give us a little rundown of what that entails?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is one of my favorite areas of the PEAK criteria, and I think it's because this really gives us the opportunity to make sure that people are living the life that they want to live when they're living with us in our organizations. But I want to point out right away, this doesn't speak to developing an activity calendar or adding a few more activities to that pre-planned activity schedule. What this speaks to is really knowing each person as an individual, what gives them meaning in their lives, what they want to do to feel like they have a sense of purpose, and creating opportunities or supporting them as they engage in opportunities to fulfill those things. So what we're talking about is truly individualized activity or individualized living for each person in the organization, which is very exciting, but it's not something that's easily done, and it takes the whole team supporting the efforts in order to be able to make this happen. So what we're getting away from is this focus on having activity or entertaining people, to helping people really figure out, how do I want to spend my day, and then supporting them to make sure that happens.
Okay, thanks. Well, the first core in this is supporting the human spirit, and within that we have two standard practices: day-to-day life and planned and spontaneous activities. Lacey, do you want to kind of describe a little bit about what those two standard practices entail?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as a reminder again, as homes are selecting cores for the PEAK program, it's important to be sure to address all the supporting practices that fall under it. So if a home chose this particular core area supporting the human spirit, they would need to address everything under each of the supporting practices for day-to-day life and planned and spontaneous activity. So the first one really gets at what Stephanie was talking about, is learning about people and how they like to spend their time. So it's really important to have some kind of tool or some kind of interview to gather information about people. So finding out about their routines, their preferences, and what gives them daily pleasure. So for instance, this is one of my daily pleasures right now, since I have children, is that I like to wake up before everybody in the house wakes up, because it's the one time during my day that I have time and space just to myself. And I love it when I hear the pitter-patter of feet coming, to the living room, but my mind is prepared, my body is prepared for the kids to come out and I'm in a better mood. That sets my day off nicely. And so that's a daily pleasure. When I move into a nursing home, that may not be my daily pleasure then, but there'll be something else that's really important to me. So finding out the little things that make people tick, and that happens over time with relationships. So we need to have a tool to gather that information and a way to communicate the information that we gather to direct caregivers. And oftentimes, direct caregivers are the ones finding out the information. So how do they communicate that with one another? How does that information get shared so that if I was living in a home now, you would know that information about me, and you would know that information about me, and you can support that daily. The routines that that direct care staff are supporting should be reflected in the person-centered care plan. Again, that's why it's so important to have people involved in the care plan. We also need to find out people's spiritual and cultural preferences. And it's not necessarily checking boxes on an assessment form that says, are you Christian, are you Protestant, are you Muslim, whatever, and checking a box. It's really finding out, what are your spiritual preferences and how would you like for those to be supported here? How does that look for you? And then creating a support system that helps them live that out the way that they want to. This particular area also looks at honoring people when they pass away, and that really is, the sky's the limit on that. What we're really trying to encourage homes to do is not just dismissing the fact that somebody has passed away and trying to protect people in the home so that they aren't sad when somebody passes away, to really take a time and moment to recognize the person's life, to recognize their importance, maybe do something that sort of reflects who they were as a person, and allow the people who got to know the resident who's passed to grieve, time and space to grieve and talk about memories. It doesn't necessarily have to be a big formal memorial service. It might just be, conversation in the home with people around you. The second supporting practice here gets at planned and spontaneous activities. So really this is like kind of the cue, bring in the activity people, right? But we can't do this, we can't accomplish this just with activity professionals only. It's going to take a whole organization. And this is one of Stephanie's loves. How do you see the activity role really changing as we move towards this type of practice?
I think the activity director really goes from being the doer and the planner to being the person who helps facilitate these meaningful opportunities. And by that I mean they help other people to know how to plan and facilitate and carry out activities. They help people learn how to develop relationships with the resident, how to have conversations about what people want, and really give others in the organization the tools that they need to do some of those roles that we have for a long time really made the activity director's job. When you think about it, if you have 60 residents and one activity director or one activity director and 2 activity assistants, it's not possible to provide this kind of activity. But if we equip everyone in the organization with the tools that they need to be able to help support people in this meaningful living, and every person has that as a focus every day, it is possible to do this. And the activity director has all of the skills necessary to help other people be able to develop those skills.
Yeah, excellent. And so then if we have this change in our idea in our organization about the fact that it's not just the activity people's job to provide meaningful life, it's everybody's, then it's really more natural then too to think differently about the activities themselves. And so one of the important aspects of the criteria is that residents are involved in planning formal activities. So the actual scheduled events that happen, the activity director, we need to move away from them sitting in an office writing, a grand plan for the month, to really engaging residents in conversations about what do you want to do here? And really the schedules should be reflective of the people who live there and what their particular interests are. It might be done through an activity planning committee, the different people talking to residents and collecting ideas, learning circles, using the learning circle to facilitate conversations. The learning circle is also a really good tool for another aspect of this criteria, that residents be involved in spontaneous activity. And really that gets at, what do you want to do today? What do we want to do here today? And we can't learn what people want to do in any given day without having conversations. So it might be conversations around the dinner table, it might be direct care staff, visiting with residents as they're getting people up for the day, to having those learning circle conversations to find out what people want to do. So we want to look at the idea of daily participation then, and what we want our day to look like, instead of just assigning this as an agenda at a resident council meeting. Resident council meetings are important and they are a facilitator of conversation, but they're not the only way we gather information. We need to look at other ways as well. So things like resident council meetings can be one aspect, but then learning circles and breakfast conversations and maybe an activity planning committee, those are other ways we can engage people.
And if you're thinking about day-to-day activity, a monthly resident council meeting or even a bi-monthly resident council meeting can't make decisions about day-to-day. Those meetings are great for things that are more of an ongoing discussion or kind of getting some feedback on how things are going, but they really can't be used to guide daily activity or daily decision making in the organization. Daily decisions have to be made on a daily basis, and so we have to figure out methods to be able to get residents in those conversations daily.
And while resident councils are very useful for certain scenarios, they really don't capture the desires of everyone living in the nursing home. It captures the input of a small number of individuals on resident council. So they have their purposes, but I agree that there are other avenues that we can take to get to these daily preferences and activities that people are interested in.
Well, and sometimes people say, well, we do resident council and we do satisfaction surveys. So we're collecting this information from people all the time. A satisfaction survey is very different than a conversation about what would you like to do today. The tone and the kind of information that you're going to get back from a person is very different. All of these things have their purpose, and they're all good things to use for the purpose that they're intended to be used for. So we have to make sure that we're not trying to double dip and try to get something out of any one vehicle from communicating with people. Often with resident council, we have 10, maybe 15% of the residents in the organization there, and usually it's the loudest 3 to 4 voices in the resident council that are sharing their opinions, and everybody else is just kind of there as a part of it. So we have to find ways to solicit all of this information from your quiet people who aren't going to sit up at a resident council meeting and tell you, as well as your more vocal persons in the organization.
Well, thank you. That really gives a wonderful rundown of this first core of Meaningful Life. The second core of community involvement. Steph, could you talk a little bit about the standard practices that fall within this core?
Absolutely. The community piece of this is really all about being involved in the internal community within the building that you're living in or your home, but then also the way your life within that internal community is spread out to be involved in the broader community around you. Being a part of a community or connected to other people around you is a really critical piece for most of us in terms of feeling like we're living a meaningful life or feeling like we have some purpose. So we have to make sure that we find ways for residents to continue to be part of a community. So the first piece of this relates to the internal community, and that's the happenings within their home. And so we've kind of talked about this idea of how do we come up with what people want to do for activities, and how do we go about daily decisions. Well, part of being in a community is being a part of the decisions that are happening there. So Lacey mentioned this idea of a learning circle. Some organizations devote time every day to having a learning circle within the neighborhood or the household or even around the table to just kind of have a conversation about, here's what's going on, what are your feelings about, how should we decorate the dining room, or how should we celebrate the upcoming holiday. Other organizations have taken this even a step farther, and in these meetings they talk about, what are we looking for in this new caregiver that we're trying to hire? And they're actually helping to make some of these decisions so that their voice is really helping to drive what's happening in their community or their home. So there are lots of decisions that are being made in the organization that could be decisions residents are involved in making instead of staff making those decisions and then telling the residents what the outcomes of those are. Another piece of this is really being involved in the life of their home. When you think about your own home, we all have little chores or tasks that we're a part of to keep home running. Whether it's folding laundry, setting the table, helping with dishes, those are all things that happen in the normal flow of our lives. And those things, if the residents want to, should be happening in the normal flow of their life. So there should be lots of opportunities for residents to become involved with the daily tasks of life. Now, they shouldn't have to every time come ask us, can I set the table, or can I do help fold laundry? Is there anything I can do? These opportunities should just be available, and then we should be supporting the people who want to take advantage of those, because that certainly does make a person feel more a part of the community or more like they're an integral or necessary part of their home. We need to think about, again, how decisions are made in our home. What are residents deciding? What are staff members deciding? Why can't we make some of these decisions together to make sure that they're in the best interest of everyone? And one of the things we need to really work at is making sure we create an environment where residents feel safe to voice their concerns about things or share their opinions. And so that gets at the idea of resident council may not be the place where I feel safe expressing what my concerns are or sharing my opinions. So it may be having some one-on-one conversations and making sure that people who are a bit more timid about that feel like it's okay to express those things. The other side of this is the external community. Often what happens when people move into a nursing home is they're isolated to exactly what is happening in that nursing home, and that broader community that they've been a part of for years, and many of them even leaders in that broader community, they're completely segregated from it, and they lose many of the ties that they had with organizations and activities. So it's our job to visit with them about what community connections that they've had and which ones they would like to continue, and work to figure out how we can make that happen. So for example, if someone really wants to go to church, we may not necessarily be able to substitute the church service that's taking place by volunteers in our organization for the church that that person has always been a part of. So we might need to brainstorm and come up with ways that we can help transport that person there, whether it be with the help of volunteers or staff members. And then we need to take it a step farther and actually make sure that we're care planning to ensure that those things in the broader community that are important to that resident are a part of that care plan, so we're making sure that those ties are being maintained. Now, there may be some persons who can no longer get out to go to things, but if those community things were brought to them, they could still fully participate. So opening the doors so that the resident can host their bridge club or their Red Hat Society or their church Bible study allows continued participation, but it comes to the person. That's a positive thing because they're still involved, but it's also positive in that it's bringing members of the broader community into the nursing home, so others are having the opportunity to be part of those connections as well. We need to make sure that when residents have family and friends that they feel welcome. Think about your routine when guests come over to your own personal home, and then think about the routine when guests come into the nursing home. Those routines probably don't look the same, and they should look the same because they're guests coming into a home. One of the things that often happens is, as an effort to be part of the community and events, we take residents to things as spectators. So instead of actively being engaged in the happenings of the community, they're spectators of the things that are happening in the community. So working to find ways that residents can be involved in community fairs and community festivals or service projects where they're actually doing something to contribute. This idea of giving back to others being important for people applies to residents living in nursing homes too. But there's a very big difference between watching other people do volunteer work and actually doing volunteer work yourself. So we need to figure out ways to get residents actively involved in those types of projects so they're truly a part of the community, both the community that they live in now and that broader community.
Well, I've talked a little bit about being able to see the relationships between some of these different domains and the cores within them, but it really seems like this final domain of meaningful life brings everything together, and it's kind of a culmination of all the different concepts that we've talked about throughout these four domains. Would you agree? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I think meaningful life is the domain that's really kind of a more advanced piece of the process, because it really does rely on some of these foundational things that have come from resident choice and home environment and staff empowerment to be able to fully carry out the intent of this domain. This is one that I really tend to encourage people to not tackle as their first step. When you first look through it, it seems like, oh, this would be fun and we'll be able to figure out ways to better engage residents and they'll be happier, they'll enjoy the process. But if these other things aren't in place, it's very, very difficult to be able to truly influence and create meaningful life. It requires that staff members be prepared to work as teams and outside of those siloed job descriptions that they're used to. It requires that the built environment be able to support people in doing different things as they want to do those. And it really requires that residents be at a point where they're comfortable with the idea of voicing their opinions and their wants and their preferences. And then the organization has to be prepared to respond to those. And so if we don't have those other pieces in place, residents might start voicing what their preferences are, and then there's really not a lot that we can do about them. So I think this is a nice one to tackle as you're farther into the process and ready to kind of start putting some of these pieces together.
We put this video together to aid with developing greater understanding of the PEAK criteria. We hope that it was helpful in answering some of your questions, but we also want you to know that we are here for you as you work through the process of change. Organizational change is an incremental process, and there will be many decisions to be made along the way. Use the PEAK 2.0 team as your partners in this process. You can reach us by contacting the phone number on your screen. Please also visit our website to find individual contact information for team members. Our website also contains lots of resources that we hope will aid your journey. We wish you well as you continue to strive for excellence in elder care, because, let's face it, we're all future elders.